Good afternoon, everyone, or perhaps morning where you are. My name is Amie, and I am the Director of Public Health Initiatives with the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute. And I am so delighted to have you all joining us today for a continuance of our SE Community Conversations series. Today, dealing with disasters and the distress and the mental health implications around disaster response. I think we have a really exciting program, and I cannot wait to share these humans with you. Just to be perfectly honest, from the moment coronavirus started and I joined the Institute, I've been looking forward to bringing these particular people to you so you could all learn a little bit more about the experience and the strength and the learnings that have been happening when people who are dedicated mental health workers bring those resources to the field of disaster relief. I hope you get so much out of today, and we have a lot to go over and go through in an hour and just see what comes up. And perhaps this is the beginning of a series of mental health and disaster work, which I would really love to do if you guys are interested in that. So we will see. So first of all, let me just say that welcome, and I'm so excited right now to consider what you will discover in our time together that may alter your life. And here's what I mean. I had a very successful professional career doing all kinds of cool things, and many of the people who are with us today, similar. But then there was this moment in my life when, for various circumstances, I stumbled upon the field of disaster relief and response and emergency management. And I realized, oh my goodness, this field is vast. I did not know about it. And there is such an opportunity to contribute to the well-being of humans on the planet. And my life was altered forever. When you hear some of the inspiring stories today, some of the convictions, you might be the same. So we could see 60, maybe 90 minutes from now, depending on how many cool Q&As you guys might have. We'll see what's there for you and what changes in your life and ways you may want to be a resource in disaster, or ways you may engage resources in disaster, or the ways you might affect policy or legislation around mental health and disaster. There's so many things that can be done to improve well-being for humans in catastrophic incidents. And I love thinking right now about those sparks flying in your world and what that might result in. As we're all jumping online right now, I see so far we have about 30 people on the line, and it looks like it's just going up continuously. So what I'd like to do is begin to tell you how we hope you can be in this conversation with us today. So many of you, thanks to life on Zoom, are very familiar with Zoom meetings, and you may or may not be familiar with this format. We're not in the meeting format, we are in the webinar format, which has it that there are panelists and attendees. If you're on the attendee side, we cannot see your video, it's all private, we cannot hear you, so go ahead and enjoy being with us from the privacy of your own home. But what we are hoping to create and working really intensively to integrate into these kind of sessions is a relatedness and a gathering. We don't want to be talking heads on screen. We want to create a space where we can be as interactive as we can with this material, with each other, because we know that, especially in the field of somatic experiencing and neuropsychological response, social engagement is a really critical factor in healing from traumatic experience. So we want to be socially engaged with you. We want to connect. So I invite you to connect with us right now by exploring your screen as we start to figure out what we're going to do here today. What you should have the capacity to do is you should be able to click on somewhere on your screen. It should say raise hand. And so if you see the button where you can raise your hand, why don't you go ahead and try that out now, and I'll see that it's working. Okay, I see one, I see two. Okay, a bunch of you got it. All right, go ahead. We're probably Zoom experts by now, so go ahead and take your hands down. And what we might do throughout the sessions is ask questions so we can raise hands and see who's who. We might do some polling. But what you'll notice in this session is we do not have the chat feature enabled. We do have the Q&A feature enabled. So if you can locate where that is on your screen, on mine it's on the bottom. If you're on a phone, it might be harder to find. But if you locate the Q&A screen, I want to invite you, go ahead and use that screen right now to type in. Oh, this is our first opportunity to get engaged. Go ahead and type in where you're chiming in from, and if you've ever responded to a disaster, and or if you've ever been a survivor of a disaster. And let the group, when you write in the Q&A, others can see it. So other people can get to see what you, okay, I've got Charlotte right there. First one, Florida, and have responded and have flooded. That was pretty straight to the point. So great to have you guys go ahead and share, try out that Q&A over the course of our time together. Here's the thing. I'd love for any of you guys to come on screen with us. So if you have a question for anybody who's on the screen, really go ahead and ask it in that Q&A, no kidding, and put, I'd like to come on screen and ask this. At which point we'll go ahead and bring you over to come on screen and ask. If you don't want to come on screen, or maybe you just want your voice audible, it's really good for us to see each other. So just go ahead and put that when you post a question, and we'll go ahead and convert you over to the panelist side. It's a little clunky when it happens, but it's real fun. We've enjoyed it a lot as a way of being related. So thanks for bearing with as we learn that. Also, if you see questions, oh my gosh, look at all these cool places, you guys. Wait, pause. I've got Malaysia on the line. Oh my gosh. Austin, Texas, chiming in from St. Paul, Chicago, Sacramento, Maryland, Jersey, North Carolina. Lots of responded, few personally experienced disasters. Oh my gosh, if we've survived, we've really survived. Wow, this is a really cool product to be here with you. So not everyone's chiming in, but you guys are starting to get familiar. As you have questions, you see a little thumb arrow, that's upvoting. If you click a thumb arrow, which I'm going to do with my friend in Malaysia right now, you're going to see that now there's two little thumbs up. I can tell that one just went to the top of the list. So if you write a question, or you see someone else writes a question and you think it's cool, give the thumbs up, and that lets us know what to prioritize and how to engage with you. So please stay engaged and connected. Okay, and then some of you will ask about recordings. Recordings will be available on Facebook Live. Some of you, if you're watching on Facebook Live right now, and you'd like to jump into Zoom links so you can interact with us, I'd go ahead and encourage you to do that. The way you do that is find the invitation on our Facebook page, follow that link, and you can register even while we're in this, and then it'll let you join us in the Zoom side so you can interact with us more. All right, logistics. Lastly, I think I will say that this is a free event. We really want it to be a social service resource in our times. We are the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute is a charitable organization that wants to contribute to the health and well-being and trauma resolution of individuals around the globe. And so we do rely on donations. And I can share with you, the screen was up earlier, but we'll share with you in the chat. In fact, I have some of our staff members are situated there in the chat to share with you the donation link if you'd like to make a donation during the course of this time we have together so that we can continue to do cool programming like this. All right, no further ado. Allow me to introduce to you our speakers for today. I want to invite Jenny and Aaron and Jen and Jennifer and Lisa. Did you catch how many Jens are in that? To all go ahead and start to come on screen with us now. Fantastic to have you guys. Woo! There it is. This is the dream panel. I am so happy to have you. Thank you each so much for being here. I could introduce you, but at this point, I, as probably everybody else, is tired of my voice. So rather than saying your name or something about you, I mean, no disrespect, I would love for introductions. If you could each say your name, the organization or organizations you work with or work for or have founded. And then as we go around, then we will dive in and ask some questions, and everyone will get to know you through the nature of the work of today. And at the end, we'll be sure we share everybody's website so that you can follow up with these amazing humans. So who would like to go first to introduce yourself? It's you all on mute. That's not gonna work. You know I can unmute you, right? I wouldn't dream.
I mean, I think you should call on someone.
Okay, I'm gonna call on someone. We're gonna start with the A's. How about Aaron?
Guess I asked for that one. Yeah, so Aaron Titus, the Executive Director of Crisis Cleanup. I am also the President of Mountain West Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, Mountain West VOAD, and author of How to Prepare for Everything. By trade, I'm an attorney, and our 10th child will arrive in January. So I'm always practicing for disasters, even at home.
True story. Who's next? I see Dr. Jen Riegle laughing. I think you should be next.
So I am Dr. Jen Riegle. I am a naturopathic doctor by trade, and I still practice in Northern California in Santa Rosa. I am the co-founder and medical director of Integrative Healers Action Network. And we have been around since the 2017 Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa and have been doing integrative health disaster work.
Thanks. Should we go for the string of Jens, and Jennifers?
For sure.
That's gonna, if you want to ask a question to Jennifer at any point on the attendee side, have fun. Who's next? On my screen, I have Lisa next. How about Lisa?
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa LaDue, and I work for LionPath International, which is an organization I founded. And I also work with Team Rubicon, where I have a really cool title of Chief Resilience Officer with the Clay Hunt Fellowship Program. And I'm happy to be here to share information that I've gathered and through my experiences for many years doing disaster response.
Thanks, Lisa. Also, I'm going to chime in. Lisa's a secret plant. She's been teaching disaster relief to somatic experiencing practitioners. That's the neuropsychological method we use to help therapists and wellness providers regulate their nervous systems around recovering from traumatic stress in life. And Lisa has been teaching disaster relief inside that organization for quite some time and is much loved and respected. So, woo, jazz hands. How about coming around to Jenny on my screen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Harrow, and I am one of the co-founders and executive director of Integrative Healers Action Network with Dr. Jen. Like she mentioned, we've been around since the major fire here in Sonoma County in 2017. And so we're very active, especially this year with all the fires that are happening in California, again, in our backyard. And so I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you, Amie, for putting together this great group. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So glad to have you, Jenny. Jenny sent a picture just a couple of weeks ago, guys, of her in her house looking out down the street, and you could see the fires over the ridge of her home. Similarly, Aaron and the person who I'm about to introduce themselves next are in a similar situation in Colorado. Actually, Lisa too. Everybody right now can see a fire from their window, kind of almost like Russia. No, just kidding. That's not funny. So really, really glad to have you guys here who are immediately in disaster response mode. Last but not least, let's have Jen go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Happily, I'm Jen Solachi. I am the founder and executive director of Therapy Aid Coalition. We are bringing online therapy to all essential workers in all 50 US states during COVID. And we are just about to open up later today to the California and the Colorado wildfires, bringing online therapy to anybody impacted there, and some FEMA incidents, I think, in Florida and Texas. So, and yes, I can see the smoke on the mountains from my window.
Wow, truly hallowing moment in our world, isn't it? Thanks, guys. That's the first round of getting to know who these guys are by their names. I can tell you I personally know them all, and I would give them a much longer bio, because each thing that these people have accomplished has touched hundreds upon thousands of disaster survivors, responders, volunteers. Some are very backed in emergency management, and some are super on the volunteer side. Some come from therapy sides. We have a lot of views represented in this set today. So we do welcome any and all of your questions, and I'll keep encouraging you throughout the session to go ahead and ask some. But we'll go ahead and get started by saying, one of my mentor is somebody who was the former emergency manager in the Florida Keys, Marty Centerfit. And when we worked together, oh gosh, I guess I didn't introduce myself in terms of disaster. I also founded a disaster relief organization. That was what I did before I came to SETI. I founded an organization that works on called Capacity Path Relief, that coordinates volunteers to bring an oasis of wellness into disaster affected communities. And we also teach resiliency workshops to responders and secondary responders. That said, when we were responding in Mexico Beach, Florida after Hurricane Michael, and it was, category 5 to hit a very small fishing village. We were working in operations. I was fortunate and a little bit oddly to be spontaneously appointed to be the operations section chief at ground zero of a category 5 hurricane, because I was the only volunteer to show up and be on the bench and get recruited at a moment when someone said, do you know anything about incident command service, about ICS? And I said, yeah, I do. And so I ended up supporting that response. But really throughout the response—
I think that's called being a voluntold.
I was voluntold, exactly. But honestly, it was one of the best experiences of my life to kind of straddle the gap between volunteerism and emergency management. And working under Marty, who was the deputy incident commander under Joby Smith in Bay County, really, we were coordinating things like getting bathrooms, getting porta potties, getting hand washing stations. There was not a porta potty on the ground for 8 days. I mean, on one hand, that's just a health and human services issue, but if you all can imagine not having access to a bathroom for 8 days, can we all see that that's also a mental health concern? There's ways that the brain starts to shut down to try and deal with these kind of complex scenarios and then recover from them afterwards. It's just so intense in the moment that it happens. And Marty and I, while we were working the problem, solving the things, getting the things in order, working with all the coordination that was required, we were having a continuous dialogue about resilience, mental health, and how these humans were processing, integrating, and supported just on the level of their own psychosocial wellness. And then also the responders, noticing what was happening with them, because the responders throughout the Panhandle were profoundly affected by how stressed out that entire experience left them. So that really raised this in my attention as almost like a primary issue of emergency management that doesn't actually come to the forefront as a serious concern. It's almost like, oh, well, yeah, people's minds and brains and hearts matter, but we'll deal with that later. And those of us who work in trauma therapy know, oh gosh, you just gave yourself a lot more to clean up later if you don't actually have some resources in real time and prior. So that's part of the goal of this conversation, is to facilitate some recognition about when, where, and how can we insert some better mental health practices into the way the system is run. But I want to kick off this first question to this group by saying, what was one of the first or primary or more significant moments in your work where you realized mental health was a critical concern in disaster response from your vantage point? And I'm not picking you this time. You gotta decide who goes first.
Not me.
That was a good method.
I've always heard the first one to speak is the one who's volunteering to go, Aaron.
I can start. So one of the first ones that comes to mind kind of sequentially where I realized that this was such a big issue. Jenny and I were talking about this because we've had a lot of shared experiences, and we've had a lot of experiences both on the community side of evacuees and people who have struggled with and survived through losing their homes and other disaster related issues. And then also we've had a lot of experience working with the first responder community. And so I wanted to share just one of the first moments, and this has happened so many times since, but one of the first moments where I realized how much mental health services and health services in general were needed for our first responders. We were primarily set up at the Red Cross shelter, and one of the biggest shelters downtown in Santa Rosa. And I remember meeting one of the majors who was in charge of the National Guard units. And at that time, what was happening in the response work for the National Guard is they were doing search and rescue mostly. And quite a few people had died in that fire. And so when I met them, and I just took a moment to speak to the major and said, you know, we can come by when we're done with our days and treat National Guard if you want us to be there and you need us. And so they said, yes, absolutely, please come by. And I think I was shocked when I got there, just realizing I've been involved with military circles before, and so I knew this, but just being older and realizing so many of those individuals that were out there doing search and rescue were 18, 19, 20-year-olds who hadn't had a lot of experiences with death before. And they were doing really difficult things throughout their days. And they would come back, and we would get there usually around 6 p.m. and some nights stay until 11 or 12 treating them. And they were so relieved to see us every single night. You could see the range of kind of heartbreaking, difficult processing emotion. And then as we started to engage with them, how they became enlivened again and able to move some of the trauma that they were experiencing, having seen what they had seen. And I specifically remember too, we had a lot of health services that they were so excited about, but something that'll always stick in my mind as well is one day I brought my dog, who was just this like fluffy, adorable lab mix. And I remember how many of them got down on the ground with him and started crying, actually, just petting him and being able to let their nervous systems relax. And that's certainly not the last time something like that has happened, but it was an eye-opening experience for me.
Thank you. What a beautiful image of all the people like just sort of having a blast with this little puppy.
Yeah, it was really sweet. It made me cry. It was, just seeing them be able to release a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because if you understand the nervous system, you get like how actually important an activity that is, but yet it can sound really trivial. Oh, I brought my dog and the kids were playing and it was good. But like, yet we know like, well, that was actually a really important moment. If you don't have that moment to release, then where did all that stuff go? Right.
Right. Yeah. And that's what you could see. There were so many of them there that you could see the people that we couldn't get to engage or that we didn't have. And most people did engage. But they had a difficult experience and kind of siloed by themselves. And so trying to just engage everyone that was there, and anyone who's worked with first responders, and I'm not a first responder myself. And so there are people here like Lisa, who, is very well versed in answering and talking about questions like this, but it's a totally different culture. And so just having, I've learned a lot and had some awareness grown over the last several years about that community.
Well, that sounds like Lisa's next then.
Sorry, Lisa.
Thanks,
I've
Jen.
always told you.
Again, throw me out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many examples from, over 20 years of doing this. Some really potent ones, some that just kind of fit in along the way. But I think one of the first examples of how important disaster mental health was at the Pentagon following the attacks of 9/11. I was there with the American Red Cross, and we had a team of disaster mental health volunteers at the Pentagon providing support for the workers who were cleaning up and doing recovery work there. And all of a sudden, an FBI officer came over to our tent and said, I need somebody to come help me. We have a contractor on site who's decompensating. And of course, one of the first thoughts that went through my mind is, you're not capable of handling this contractor who is decompensating. Isn't, the FBI can't handle this. But it was one of the reasons it was so meaningful to me was it was an example of something you talked about or alluded to earlier, Amie, of how siloed mental health tends to be in disaster settings. Even now, even with all we know and all the attempts, the Red Cross and other organizations, other VOAD organizations have made to provide that support, there's still this silo. And granted, that was 2001, so it's been a while, but I still see the same thing. So anyhow, I went on the four-wheeler with this FBI agent to another tent where they had this gentleman who was a building contractor. If you remember, they were doing renovations on the Pentagon at the time that it was hit in that attack on another part of the Pentagon. And this was one of the contractors who had been there the day on September the 11th. They were doing renovations on one part of the Pentagon, and he happened to be just outside. They had a contractor's, they had a little command center place set up, a little modular. And he stepped out of that at about the same time that the jet hit the Pentagon, and totally traumatized him. I mean, it's almost like his brain completely went offline, as we know it can do. And so he told me what he did was he took off and went to Virginia Beach for a few days and just drank solidly. He just dealt with it with alcohol. After about 5 days, he thought he could return, went to the Pentagon, and went into a complete, what we would know is a complete freeze and a collapse. And he was shaking so hard that all I did, one, was asking if I could touch him, put my hand on him to help him realize where he was, that he was here now, that was then, and help calm his nervous system. And that was before I knew SE, before I knew anything about somatic experiencing in 2001, but it was the start of my path to learn how you can truly deal with trauma, realizing that nothing cognitive, no kind of talk intervention was helpful at that point in time. And so at least I'd had enough experience working as a clinician to have a sense and an instinct that clearly wasn't going to work. And we did get him to a psychiatric facility for an assessment and off the grounds of the Pentagon. So that was one of the places where not only was it acutely apparent, but it was also so obvious that someone even like the FBI had no ability. And I know they have mental health people. They have forensic mental health. They have all kinds of mental health support, but they didn't have anybody there who knew how to support this man and help stabilize him and get him to help. So that was one of my first really, really obvious examples that comes to mind.
Thanks, Lisa.
I have a question for you, Lisa. Did you have so much experience, and your experience goes back quite a ways. Did you have to struggle through that at all as a mental health worker to find out that the cognitive and talking about it with someone in that state was not going to be a helpful tool at that point?
Well,
or was it just your first, your instincts were just on? Was that one of your first experiences?
Well, the intervention was instinctual, but what happened after I came back from a month at the Pentagon, I spent from the 14th of September to the 14th of October there, and ended with a trip to the Heart Senate office building when anthrax was delivered the same day. Came out of that, came home for a month, and then went to New York for 2 weeks and helped with the New York response. My big lessons out of that was I came home with real clear signs of post-traumatic stress. And that's where I really learned there was no way that I had been a cognitive therapist, a rational emotive therapist for many years. None of that worked with me. And so I knew firsthand, if it wasn't working with me to deal with my own symptoms, it hadn't worked for other people as well. And I thought my career was over until I went on a deep search for a way to deal with trauma, not just my own, but for people that I could continue to work with. And that's where I learned all about neurology, not all about, the very little bit that I know of neurology, neuropsychology, and working with the body to incorporate some stability into the nervous system and be able to process more. That's the long answer to your question.
I'd love to, yeah, sorry to jump in. I'd love to tap into that for everyone else's introductions too, because I think what you're saying is part of why I think we wanted to host this at the Institute, is we really wanted to bring up, to highlight what you guys are both starting to talk about. And so I just want to even invite Erin, Jennifer, and Jenny, as you guys introduce yourselves, to be that help. Something that I know the six of us know is exactly what's being talked about right now, which is that talk therapy is not necessarily what's needed. Not sitting down and saying, hey, let's talk about your trauma, or if mom didn't hold you enough as a baby and now it's showing up today. I mean, this isn't the time. It's a short term, often physical intervention or physiological intervention that can start to interrupt that. Lisa, I've talked to so many SE practitioners now who became practitioners because of 9/11. Like they lived in that community. Oh, Jen, I was just thinking of your story, Jen. Maybe you'd share that as part of how we get to know you, because yeah, that's right. That's what I'm thinking of.
I mean, it may be the new kid on the block when it comes to formal disaster relief, because our nonprofit was born out of COVID. But on a personal level, you asked one of our first experiences of knowing how important mental health is in terms of disaster. There is nothing like having your own complete felt sense, full embodied trauma response. I was in my early 20s and I was 2.5 blocks away from the Twin Towers on 9/11. I lived 4 blocks away. And so I was getting a completely different master's degree, but because of that experience and because of jumping right into response, I volunteered at Bellevue Hospital and was helping people searching for loved ones to see if their loved one was actually at the hospital or not. And I didn't have a single person who was actually at the hospital. So you were dealing with family members that were completely distraught. I had no training whatsoever. I was studying interactive telecommunications at NYU, so totally unrelated. And through my own healing with an amazing SEP, I ended up switching and going and getting my clinical social work degree. And thank goodness, I feel super fortunate to really have gotten my SE training in 2005, I think. So right away, so all of my work has been really SE informed, and just that deep, deep embodied personal experience of healing from 9/11. I think I've always kind of known how important that was because of my personal experience. So.
And I don't want to hog too much time here, but you made me think of something, Jen, as you were talking about that one of the other stories that I have from September 11th was that I was also at the Pentagon Family Assistance Center, where family members came in who were basically providing information to identify their deceased loved ones if anything was found to identify them. But one day I was asked to talk with this, he was a public affairs cameraman who had gone straight to New York City. And he said, because of his credentials as a cameraman, they just let him into places. And he said, Lisa, I saw things I should have never seen. And this man was where I coined the term for myself of the trauma handshake. his handshake was cold, sweaty, and limp, and he was pale. And it made me so aware of how even people on the periphery, but are involved in some way, even if it's the media covering the event, are affected by events, and we have to have ways to reach them and provide them with the support too.
So, yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Jennifer and I were having this very conversation yesterday, as a matter of fact, as we were talking about what it means to be affected by disaster. Neither of our homes have burned, but we can see the mountain outside of our homes burning, and we're just discussing how we're affected by it. Like with me and I have a routine to deal with the adrenaline rush, and I kind of put it away, and then that kind of gets interrupted because the kids want to know about what's happening, and now I have to talk about it more, and I don't want to, you know, the kids want to know, like, are we going to have to leave tonight, or is our home going to burn down? I have learned in my work, disaster relief work, how to talk about disasters so that my kids, for example, don't get a skewed perspective of risk. You know, I realized I had to change course one day when my daughter came up and asked, is a tornado going to come tonight? No, you know, I got to be aware of this. So yes, we're all affected by disasters, whether or not physically. Most of what I do is remote in nature, which can cause its own cognitive dissonance when you have a hurricane going on inside of you, but where you are, the sky is blue, and my kids are smiling, and my neighbors have some vague notion that I'm helping with the hurricane, and so they ask me some insipid question like, how's it going in Texas? And like, I can't answer that without hitting you in the face, because it just, you know, you don't even know what you're asking. And so you have like these deep emotional reactions. Sometimes I will go out into the field. I remember one time in Austin, Texas, floods, 2015. I met a woman. She was about 28. She looked about 45. She was disheveled and barefoot and walking amidst just these mountains of debris. And she was incongruously picking up small trinkets on the ground. And she opened her hands and showed me a small crucifix and an earring without a back, you know, amidst all of this trash. And she was picking them up for her neighbors in case they wanted them again. And she told me who she thought they belonged to. Her mother, she was at her mother's house, and she escaped the rising floodwaters by sitting in a windowsill all night and watched helplessly as her only companion, her dog, drowned in the living room. And she was able to save her husband's ashes, but that's about all from the house. Jen Riegle asked if you have to struggle through SE. I know I absolutely have. You know, I'm not a mental health practitioner at all, which makes you wonder, like, why am I here? Sometimes I wonder that myself. But yes, I remember at that home, the woman's boyfriend was there helping to clean up, and everyone was exhausted and had been working for days and days and days. And I remember this giant mistake that I made. I walked up to him and I asked him, how can I help? And his whole affect just became overwhelmed. And I knew in that instant that I was wrong. And you know, I corrected, and I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew that I had to do, not talk. And actually, I had that very same experience 2 days ago when I was helping a neighbor, friends evacuate. A neighbor came up, I offered to help evacuate, and she approached me and was about to leave, and the weight of leaving her home possibly and never seeing again was just on her face. And she thanked me, and there was nothing to do at that moment, but there was plenty to feel. And despite all the COVID restrictions, I gave her a giant hug, because I think that's about what the right response was at that moment. And I'll finish up here, but like, I've learned two things about disaster mental health. First, there are not enough of you. And second, it feels scary as a non-practitioner because it feels regulated and like I'm not supposed to do it, right, as a non-practitioner. And so maybe, maybe we could talk a little bit about those concepts.
Can I jump in with a comment? It's okay. I'm just noticing as Aaron was talking, for me, I just felt my energy rise when he was talking about the window and the dog. And if that's happening for anybody else, I just noticed in myself, I had to really take a minute and notice the tightness in my chest and just feel my seat in the chair and ground. So again, since we are talking about some activating things right now, if you are tuning in and you're feeling that too, this might just be a really wonderful moment to take a pause and really notice where you're feeling the most grounded in your body, just to invite a tiny bit more regulation.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to be the activating one. Sorry.
No, it's brilliant. Both of those feedbacks are brilliant. I mean, I think we're all probably in agreement about that. I want to just animate one thing you said a little bit more, Aaron, for people who may not know you. Running crisis cleanup, which is what Aaron does. He's a founder and he created this. It's like a hotline and a mapping system for people who need resources after their homes have been destroyed. And when he talks about the incongruousness of like seeing a blue sky outside while responding, he has networks of hundreds of volunteers around the country who are answering hotline calls. And so I just want to kind of insert into this conversation that not only are the survivors of the storm experiencing a certain level of trauma, but in that you've got a volunteer in Kansas experiencing the devastating trauma of Superstorm Sandy, because they're on the phone with one after the other, survivors. And similarly at Capacity Path Relief, we do wellness oasis for dispatchers as often as we can. We just did one in Baldwin County for Hurricane Sally. Basically, my volunteer org is run by volunteers, and they let me know all the fun stuff they do. And what they did is had a whole volunteer day of serving the dispatchers who similarly hear all this trauma and never get the sense of the resolution. And so these are human beings we're in the grocery store with, like we're just in the world with people who are just drinking in each other's crisis trauma. And so I just want to name that in case people didn't know when everyone was talking about the blue sky, seeing a blue sky while you're dealing with the disaster, but also to put secondary responders and volunteers on our map of who we need to care for. And I know Jenny Harrow does a lot. And let me just say one last thing here that what I'd like us to really be thinking about, because time is moving fast and these stories they're rich. This is beautiful. This is the conversation getting started. Is as you're listening, I just want to encourage you to be thinking about what are we learning from each one of these shares. From Dr. Jen, we're getting like, oh yeah, something as simple as an animal's presence. There were a lot of different things you could pull out of these. Is making a difference that's actually real. From Lisa's story, you got hey, the system might be actually overwhelmed, that there may not be structures and systems in place, and mental health is this silo over here. And be listening for each one of these of like, what are points we're noticing? Because as we notice problems, limitations, or restrictions on how humans solve things, we can begin to systematically start to address them. So rather than being like Facebook, like, oh man, here's another million bad, horrible stories, let's all get activated. I'm not critiquing you, Aaron. I think it was important. I think all of these are important. What I'm saying is we may be uniquely qualified to begin a dialogue in history to transform the conversation by saying, hey, this isn't something that can't be addressed. And isn't just a horror story of a long list of sob stories until the media gets tired of it, because also, like Lisa named, the media are traumatized. Gina Ross wrote a book on it. But rather, we can start getting together and systematically thinking about how do we stabilize communities in crisis? How do we stabilize responders? How do we begin to insert structures, processes, methods, considerations that elevate the significance of this particular dialogue? I know that I saw some people who are attendees on the list, and I know that they're survivors of recent events, and they're here just as survivors. I also see some emergency managers on our attendee list. So this is not a topic we're afraid of. There are actually qualified psychology-backed people, I speak in full sentences. There are actually therapists, licensed mental health providers, and all different kinds of wellness advocates and wellness providers who know there are actual methods to interrupt disaster trauma. once we know, we can't help but know. And we have to be like Jen and Jenny and Dr. Jen to create organizations to respond. Someone wrote, and Jenny, this is my cue to you for your intro. One of the emergency managers wrote in the Emergency Management Nexus in Facebook, I don't know who any of these organizations are. And I'm like, well, of course, because they're being born right now of the necessity for organizations that can deal with wellness as a critical concern. I wonder if you might want to introduce yourself and share something about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great lead. Because yeah, our organization, Integrative Healers Action Network, which we also call IHAN, was born in the midst of disaster. I mean, the fires that started 3 years ago in Sonoma County here, the Tubbs fire, was, our community had never seen anything like this before. I grew up here in Sonoma County and have lived here off and on my whole life. And I had actually just moved back to Sonoma County a week before the Tubbs fire started, and was doing work with an integrative health center in Santa Rosa. And so when the fire started in the middle of the night, I mean, it was, winds that were 50, 60 miles per hour, super dry conditions. And it just took everyone completely off guard. The fires came in from like the eastern part of the county into the city of Santa Rosa at 2:00 in the morning. And so people were evacuating with sometimes 10, 15 minutes to grab their loved ones and run. And so when we started volunteering at the shelters and just seeing the space that people were in, I mean, it was a lot of just freeze. People were just in complete shock. Like it just had never happened before. And so what we learned is that one, just the power of presence, of just like, of really like, of something that Aaron mentioned of like, that we don't need to speak, that we don't need to like go into these deep conversations, that people were not even ready for that. I mean, when Jen and I started organizing various body workers and acupuncturists and naturopathic doctors and homeopaths to come to the shelters, to go to the first responder base camps, I mean, what we saw was that one, people were really excited to do this work, to be able to provide support and care. A Facebook group that got started during that fire, we had about 2,000 practitioners from around the Bay Area join within a couple of days, who were just really like, oh my gosh, how can we help? How can we go up to Sonoma County and be there and provide care and support? And then just seeing the transformations that would happen in the shelters. Jen was able to share the beautiful transformations we saw at the first responder base camps, but when we were at the Red Cross shelters and seeing and being with people who were just frozen, who didn't have words to express their experience, but to have an individual, whether they're a practitioner or just a caring, compassionate volunteer who was there just to be present with someone, to hold the space with them. And then when we saw the power of touch, of being able to bring in body work, and when words didn't have the power to express their state that they were in, but being able to provide care in a way of touching them, of providing that support of like, you are in this moment, you are safe. And to be able to bring them into the present moment of orienting to that. And then from there, I mean, I'd see like multiple people coming from that state of shock and freeze, and then gradually getting ready to talk. And then the conversations would flow more easily. And then being able to look for the resources of, okay, what's next? Okay, I'll talk to FEMA, or I'll talk to other state agencies of, the long road of recovery. And so I think for everyone out there who's interested in getting involved in disaster response work, it's, I mean, I did not expect to get involved in this. It was just, this would happen to my home. This was my community. And it was one of the most heartbreaking events to happen in this area, but it was also one of the most heart-opening. Having lived here for so long, I had never seen our community come together in a way where everyone was just like, what's next? how can I help? What's needed? And the connection and the love and the compassion and the opening was completely unprecedented, just as the wildfires were unprecedented. These opportunities for connection and support were it's what keeps me coming back into wanting to continue to build this. So, and the power of like we said, just being present and coming back into the body.
Amazing. Jenny, that's so beautiful on so many levels. It's a perfect time for us to take a poll on volunteerism and disaster. And two, it also helps us highlight that people are asking about how to volunteer with your org. So I'm going to answer that in a minute. But I just really want to acknowledge what you're saying and point out to all the attendees, like, guys, everyone on the screen, you notice like everyone's nodding with this, like, oh yeah, that's what you do. That's what you do. When she's describing orienting, that's a technique within the somatic experiencing cadre of resources for how one can do a neurobiological reset using the optical nerve and how it connects into the polyvagal cortex by taking a visual vacation, or there's different things we could talk about around orienting. I won't go too much into it, but I want to just take a moment to plug a couple of things. What? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add a little bit about what Jenny's saying, is that I think, one, the organization that Jenny and Jen have created is incredible. And they have this amazing group of volunteers who I've met some of them and it has been a very heart opening. And I also want to say that's such an example of the way people do reach out and want to help once a disaster is hit. And there are many roles people can fill. You don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a doctor. And I think that's what I'm hoping that we're leading to, is the fact that there's a role for everybody who really wants to help. And so I thought that was such a great example. IHAN is such a great example of how two dedicated women just sort of turned their lives upside down to create this organization to provide volunteers at a time. And those opportunities just aren't always there, but that pool of people who really want to help is always there.
Disaster relief is so meaningful. It is so meaningful. I mean, I was told that really searing story, and it's searing, and you have those experiences. But I've heard the term that disasters knock down fences and make good neighbors. Even disaster sociologist Samuel Henry Prince, who's kind of the godfather of disaster sociology, way back in 1920, recognized that under the stress of emotional excitement, there arose a mental unity. There was noticeable the feeling of safety associated with togetherness, and I think that's just part of the human experience, no matter what. And disasters are truly one of those unifying events in all of the graveness. If you have not read the book, A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, I highly commend that one to you. So, and now it is grave, it is hard, it is difficult, and especially the longer you go, right? Long-term recovery is disaster recovery, and that's one thing that we all learn, but it's worthwhile.
Thanks, Erin.
I think that's the crux too of the question that you posed, or I guess it wasn't even a question, Erin, but a comment that you made, that as a non-healthcare worker, that it's scary kind of to get into the waters of mental health. And to me, and I'm curious to see what our mental health providers think about this too, but to me, the distinction is drawn a pretty clear line between disaster mental health and what you do in disaster mental health to help stabilize someone. And I think a lot of people can pick up the skills to both help stabilize people around them and also just to stabilize themselves, which will help tremendously in stabilizing people around them. And that vast distinction between that and what a lot of us think of as traditional mental health and talk therapy. And so in my opinion, and maybe one day this will change, but currently as it stands for me, my opinion kind of sits on that line of like, if you're doing that talk therapy, deeper work, you're doing what a mental health provider goes to school for years to do with someone and kind of diving deep. First of all, that should be done outside of disaster. It's not the time in disaster, and that should be left to a mental health provider. And there are certainly things in disaster that need a mental health provider there. But there's this basic set that I've learned over the last several years of skills that are totally different. And they're centered around stabilization. And it's one of the reasons that I think tools like the scope tool from SETI are really helpful, because they break it down really succinctly for people to say, these are the things that I can do to regulate my nervous system and to help other people to orient to and find some moments of slowness and stabilization in their current experience of disaster. I think we should be teaching everyone to do that. And that's part of this mission that I really believe in, that SETI is working with right now, that is really beautiful, is that more people who know how to do that, the more opportunity we have with the maybe limited number of mental health providers we have to transfer cases or people to them that need a greater level of support.
Thanks for that plug, Jen. Jen is one of the people. We have a work group of people who are trained in neurobiological intervention, psychology, and various related professions who have been helping develop the SE Crisis Stabilization and Safety Program. And that's called CSS. And I know Danny is in there in the chat, and I'm in the Q&A. And Danny, if you would create a new question and answer right now that just shows the link to www.traumahealing.org/scope, you can see what we mean. It's just some real quick exercises that can be done that borrow the knowledge of over 17 different, people trained in neuropsychological methods to interrupt crisis. It's a tool that you can do in 5 minutes or less to just kind of get a reset. And I want to really plug, so we're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to plug that we are doing these as free events. So I've been getting some messages from my team over here saying, hey, don't forget, this is a donations only event. So I do want to play NPR broadcaster for a moment and encourage all of you to take out your phone right now. It wouldn't be rude if you did, and go text a message to 26989, which I think is also somewhere in that Q&A, 26989, and the word you would put in without space in between would be support SE. And that will take you right on through to our traumahealing.org/donate page, and you could make a donation towards this kind of programming or anything that supports neuropsychological methods to resolve trauma, which I think we're all talking about, and we think it's really important. So plug for the donations. Also, let me say that, we're getting to the top of the hour, and we did post this as a 60-minute session because I didn't want you guys to not come because it's a lunch session. But we can go for longer. I think we need to get into some of these Q&A, where I see Bianca and a few other people, anonymous, are asking, how do I volunteer, ways to get in. They're asking about the resources and the web pages. We will be sending out the resources and the links to everybody's website in here in a follow-up email. So if you're wondering, how do I register with IHAN, Team Rubicon, Crisis Cleanup as a hotline answerer, or Therapy Aid Coalition, or Coronavirus Online Therapy, we're gonna send you those links, and I'd encourage you to explore them, register. These are all partners with us in one capacity or another, and we really endorse, support, and enjoy their work in the world. We find it really meaningful and important, and I think you guys do too. So we'll keep going for a little bit with some more questions. If I see, all I need to see is one question pop in the Q&A right now about some complex nuance that we have all started to talk about, and that will be my signal to you that we can that you guys want to keep going. I also see a few people have raised blue hands. I see Charlotte has a raised blue hand. If you have a question, I just ask you, please post it in the chat, and then we'll know if we should bring you on for it or not. That said, in the meantime, we're going to pop up a little poll. Rebecca, if you could pop up the poll for us on, have you volunteered in disaster relief? Panelists, do you guys get to see this too? Who knows, these magical tools. Why don't you go ahead and let us know you know, by the way, it doesn't collect your information. We won't have your names. We won't know who said what. It's really just kind of a curious question for all of us. So we'll know what your responses are. And so as you guys are responding, my co-host is hidden behind the scenes with me. So if you hear me talking to someone else, that's why. We can go ahead and have you all go ahead and vote on that poll, and then go ahead and take the poll down. And then I'll see if she can't get me some information about what your responses are. We're just figuring out our way around these modalities, how to use them and be cool and more interactive and more fun with them. Okay, cool. So that said, Q&A, looks like a few things have popped up. I have a question from Nalana Krishnan, who is our guest in Malaysia. And Nalana, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, nope. Rebecca, you'd have to unmute. I don't have the capacity to do that. I want to ask you if you'd like to come on screen to ask your question to us. Rebecca, if you're able to unmute her. So we're just figuring out our host management thing. Maybe we can't do that. I'm just going to read her question to you panelists. She says, I'm an SEP, which is a somatic experiencing practitioner. That means a therapist of some variety, or a coach or a wellness practitioner who's trained in the SE techniques. And she says, I really want to be equipped on how to deal with trauma immediately, especially at an accident or a disaster scene. I'm not a first responder, and I have very basic ideas of how to be present with someone, speaking softly, allowing them to orient, also self-regulating. I just wonder what else I can do. Any workshops on this coming up? And is the scope workshop the one? So Nalana, yes, I'll answer you. We're developing a whole crisis stabilization and safety curriculum. There is a work group working on that. But I want to pitch this question over to Lisa, because Lisa, I know, was down in the Bahamas after Dorian. We were both there working on 2 different islands. And I heard Lisa was up there just doing classes at the shelters. You know, all of us know that we have to get spontaneously into action. She was doing classes on mental health and psychosocial support in the shelters on, you know, what to do and how to be present with someone. And Lisa, maybe you could share with us a few of your tips from the field that are, you know, in addition to scope, some things you have, or and if anyone else wants to join in, go for it.
So first of all, I only did one training for counselors and clergy people, and that was the only one I did. But it really was an accumulation of the skills that I've gathered mainly through SE, from somatic experiencing, and being on many accident and fire scenes as a firefighter for 8 years up in the mountains of Colorado. I think, Alana, I always joke about the fact that the kind of trauma intervention skills that I think you're talking about, that immediate intervention, is, in my mind, SE beginning 1. Those are the skills that we're taught in beginning 1. How to stabilize. And the scope tool is just a really nice, succinct way of bringing those skills out in common terminology for people who don't necessarily, you know, haven't taken any somatic experiencing courses, so they don't know our vocabulary. But it's a simple way of connecting and helping people be present and being present with them, so they're not caught in the trauma of the past. Even if it was just 5 minutes ago, it's no longer now. Helping them be in the present and helping them know that you're there with them. In our SE world, we know we call it social engagement. Jen mentioned it early when she was talking about her therapy aid and, you know, the way that they provide that. But I will say that in the Bahamas, and I had told Amie this, that never before had I experienced quite the situation as a disaster responder, because I was there very quickly. I was in the main evacuation site where evacuees were coming from Abaco Island and getting off the planes, and those who needed medical care would come over to a little clinic area we had set up to address their medical issues. And I would notice something like someone seemed to be fine and their blood pressure was, you know, relatively low, but their heart rate was racing. And I noticed that physical inconsistency and realized their nervous system, you know, they're on you're stuck on high and stuck on low. You know, they got a foot on the brake and they have a foot on the accelerator. They were so freshly into it that honestly, my main intervention was holding them as they cried. And I'll never forget that in the Bahamas, it really felt like mostly what I did was hold people as they cried their tears on my face, pre-COVID, obviously. But that's what they needed. They needed literal connection, and they had no words. There were no words at that point. And there were no words I could give them. You know, the stories that I did hear were people, you know, family members being ripped out of their hands by the floodwaters and watching multiple people in the water, not just the dog, you know. I don't mean to top you, Erin, you know, and not to traumatize people more. But in those cases, we are our most important tool. And so Jen Riegle mentioning stabilizing ourselves is sometimes the best we can do. So we have to know how to use those skills for ourselves effectively before we try doing them with anybody else, especially when we're working and when we were in Thailand with the team that the former Foundation for Human Enrichment, the early SETI, when they sent our team to Thailand to help after the tsunami, we talked about we're working in the trauma void. It isn't past, it's still happening. And so it's really important to use those skills for ourselves, feeling our own. I feel my feet on the ground so much. Notice my breath, notice my surroundings, notice where my support people are when I'm working in those spaces. So I wish I had something maybe more elegant to share with you, but it isn't elegant in the sense it's not complicated. And that's where I say everyone can learn these skills, and they're the ones we need in those moments. And I hope that's helpful.
Lisa, would you, or someone else to that? It certainly is helpful. I think we're all really getting that it's like just a presence is really powerful, and that there's certain different ways of being present that you have found actually work. We're all trying to cultivate these into programs and systems, but we have people asking, one person says, I'm an unlicensed worker earning my SEP. I would love to follow up on Erin's suggestion that we discuss the role for unlicensed contributors to this work. And, maybe Jen, Jen Solachi may have something to do with that, because her organization was formed, and I know you really had to wrestle with, am I going to use licensed therapists? Can I use coaches? How do I deal with this? How do we make the decisions to do that? And but also in light of some things, Erin, you may want to chime in about the fact that emotional spiritual care and clergy and volunteer just compassionate care, and maybe Jen and Jenny, Lisa, you might know about the FEMA's crisis counseling program, where people can be a crisis counselor if you're not a licensed therapist. There's a lot of different ways we could get to this. So I just want to kind of pitch those out there and see what y'all have to say about that question. How can people get involved if they're not a licensed provider?
I can jump in and answer, or I guess speak to what you're talking about. In terms of my organization, it's really was set up to, Erin and I were talking about this last night, essentially be like the second wave for folks, since we're not on the ground. When the dust settles a little bit and then they're ready to process some of the trauma, then they can come over to Therapy Aid and connect with a trauma therapist and do a little bit of trauma reconciliation and healing in that way. But I did want to just speak to what Lisa was saying, because on a personal level, unfortunately, I also have tons of family and friends that were involved in the Paradise campfire. I'm from Chico, California, which is the neighboring town. And I couldn't get home to help, which killed me. I had a broken leg at the time. But the one thing I suggested to all of my family and friends was just to do a simple deltoid hold. That was super, super helpful. And then to be as grounded and aware in their own bodies as possible, because you're letting your nervous system for that co-regulation. And the more grounded we can be, the more we can lend our grounded nervous system to the person whose system is not. So
What's a deltoid hold?
a deltoid hold. I don't have anyone to demonstrate on. It's you're basically holding the person right on the deltoid and you're applying pressure, and they will tell you how much is the exact right amount for them. And it helps the nervous system ground. I think that's, you know, Lisa was mentioning holding people. It's the same concept, right? It's just helping. It's one of those little SE tricks that's fantastic with helping to ground the nervous system.
Thank you.
And I can say from our perspective, we realize, so we have our integrative health practitioners who are seeing people for one-on-one sessions. And we also have our like care support, crisis support, who's our first point of contact when people come into our little clinics that we build in the shelters, or whether they be in the first responder base camps. Those people are incredibly important. And I think it's not just in our organization, it's in every single disaster relief organization. If you have the tools, and I can imagine this would be true, Aaron, for people on the other end of the phone in your organization as well, if you have the tools of an SEP and you can apply those, you're going to be in that much better at disaster response in any capacity. Basically, you could choose what really spoke to your heart, and when you're interacting with humans, whether it be in crisis cleanup or as a first point of contact as they enter a shelter, or as a first point of contact in a clinic, or there are a million different things you could do with it, the skills that you will be using just in communicating with someone and recognizing whether their nervous system is overloaded will be incredibly invaluable. And I have seen many times really well-meaning volunteers in different capacities just kind of fumble on the thing that drives trauma a little bit deeper, because we don't have, in general, we're just kind of coming around to learning this incredible base of knowledge for a lot of people. And so we live in a both challenging and inspiring world right now, I think. And the more that those skills can be within your nervous system and you have them to offer to other people, no matter what you do, you're going to be a much more effective person to interact with for someone who's been in disaster.
So Liz just asked a question that I found myself grappling with like yesterday. How do we help ground and calm when we can't touch because of COVID? My response at that moment was, oh, forget it, I'm giving you a hug, I don't care. But obviously as practitioners, that's not exactly the advice that you can give professionally. I mean, I love that question. Thank you, Liz, for answering it, for asking
it. There's another great question on Facebook that I think you guys might like. Brittle Jane Redsdale wrote, interested to hear more about how you as practitioners and volunteers self-regulate effectively in the field so that you can keep showing up for others. And we've all spoken about this extensively. And now we're quiet about it, which is magical.
Well, yeah, I think all of us are thinking, well, we've all got like 3 hours to talk about it. I mean, it depends. It depends on the disaster. I guess in my brain, I think, wow, okay, I got this figured out. I got it solved, right? I did it this last time. And so this next time should be easier. It should be different. It shouldn't be as intense. It shouldn't, like, I shouldn't. And that word should, I've come to abhor it. It just is such a useless word most of the time. You are experiencing this. And even though I can name a lot of things, I'm not a practitioner, but I, hang around cool people like you, and I pick up things by osmosis, and I can name a lot of things that I'm experiencing and that are happening. And there's part of me that thinks, well, by naming it, I can therefore control it. And there is some truth to that, but that's not just the case. There is no around, there's only through. You have to go through it, and you have to recognize it. Things that I do, I've got personal patterns. What I do most of my stuff remotely. And when you're in the middle of a disaster, everything pauses, like the whole world pauses. You don't have to go pick up your kids from that thing or write that bill or, you know, whatever it is, right? The mundane life pauses, and there's a social understanding when you're in that context that everything is paused. When you're not there, like if I paused my life, I'm coordinating 4 or 5 disasters at any given time throughout the whole year. I can't pause my life. And so, like for me, a lot of it is just coming up with these coping strategies to deal with the constant cognitive dissonance. Sometimes that means walking away. A lot of times, honestly, it means talking with friends and colleagues who are experiencing the same thing. Talking with and spending time with my wife and my kids makes a huge difference. Like just taking that vacation, like I'm going to be not in disaster land for the rest of the day. And yes, my phone is buzzing off the hook and bad things are going to happen if I turn it off, but it's okay. It won't be that bad. I don't know. I'll let somebody else go now.
I think that's huge personally. I think it's nice to have a team. In IHAN, we work as a team. And during that first year, something that Jenny and I maybe didn't have a lot of, but we've since realized is so important is what Erin's talking about with sometimes you need to just say, I need to be offline for the next 12 hours. I can't operate right now. And I think that's a really important recognition piece. But what we always tell our volunteers to start with is we provide them with a lot of extra tools too, but we all have coping strategies. Our lives can be stressful at sometimes. And so I like to have people start with a base of whatever you do to self-regulate normally, do more of that. And we have the, I think in a disaster, because we're moving so quickly sometimes, there's the natural tendency to do less of that. So I like to meditate in the morning, double, triple, whatever, and it's such a small amount of time in my day, but more meditation, more time with family. And when it can't be more linear time, more quality time. So times where like, okay, for the next hour, I'm going to set this down and I'm going to be really present with what's going on in front of me. And we're lucky enough in our organization as well to be able to receive care. And so we always encourage our practitioners and our volunteers to go, and if you feel drawn to or you feel like you need care, go and receive care from the practitioner next to you in a time where it's slow. And remember that when you need a break, we would rather have you take a break than to show up and be traumatized yourself or show up in a way that you wouldn't want to be there. And so that's what we're always trying to kind of promote as far as self-care in our works.
When you're trying to talk, I have a question, this is actually for all of you, but Jen, how do you convince people that getting self-care is okay? I think we all are swimming against this cultural tide of, I'm the volunteer, or I'm coming to the rescue, right? I'm the hero. I shouldn't, there's that word again, shouldn't, right? I shouldn't be affected. I'm not the one who lost their home. And so I'm the strong one. And if, admitting that I need help, well, why should I take, it's this combination of feeling like the hero, but also a sense of guilt, a sense of weakness. I'm taking away resources that should belong to someone who needs it more than me. If there's a phrase that I hear more than any other after disaster, it's, no, I'm okay. Please help someone who needs it more. Like I hear that more than anything else. So just wondering what your experience has been like.
I really like
swimming against that tide.
If I could on that one, Erin, because I'm going to bring up something that's not a very popular topic, but as you started, and as we think about how this goes, well, I'm the one that has to do this and I'm the volunteer. What you're hearing is the word I a lot. And our ego gets really involved with this wonderful work that I'm doing. And I don't want to admit that I need help because, because I'm supposed to be this wonderful, omnipotent person who's not affected by it because it's I. And there's way too much I and ego in disaster response a lot of times. Less from well, I'm very biased, but less from firefighters and other first responders because they're literally putting their lives on the line. But as a disaster, one of the lessons I learned from my fire chief when I started training to be a firefighter, way older than I should have even started being a firefighter, but I did. He taught us it's not our emergency. We have to remember it's not our emergency, to keep it in perspective. And it's not our disaster unless we're one of the survivors or it is our community, which makes it way more difficult. Nonetheless, it's not my disaster. And so I need to slow myself down, realize I'm not all that important. And if I'm a part of a really good team, and if I'm the leader of a really good team and have done my work, my mantra is nobody's going to die if I'm not there for a certain amount of time. It's not about me. I'm not that important if I have a good team, but we take that on for our own sense of importance sometimes. And it's a real seductive little thing, that ego, trying to sneak in there and get our attention and get its appetite filled. But I would also want to go back to the other side of the question of what do we do? I like to think that I have an SE trained Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder. And my SE trained Jiminy Cricket is always watching, which was a bit of a problem as a firefighter, because I'm trying to engage and I'm still going, oh, look at that. I wonder what's going on. Wonder. And it's like, shut up. No, I've got to take this hose, or, I've got to deal with this smoke, or I've got to get in this crunched up car and hold C-spine support or something. But what I think of a really bad call, and I'm not going to go into details about it, but it started out as a potential suicide attempt and ended up with a death, a real nasty scene, and many hours on scene. Got back home early in the morning, and I thought, wow, it's kind of weird. This isn't bothering me. So I sat down to have graham crackers and milk and check my email before I went back to bed, thinking, I'm a little concerned that this does not seem to be bothering me. I got into bed and I realized my entire body was reverberating, not shaking outwardly to shake the bed, but I could feel my entire system like just brrr. And I went, oh, there it is. My Jiminy Cricket says, oh, there it is. Just pay attention to that now and let that be. But that was one of those times when I thought, none of my colleagues know to go home and do that. If I didn't know what I know, I would have gotten up and had a really stiff drink, I'm telling you, and would have forgotten about trying to get to sleep the rest of that night. So these skills are so important, and we do need them, and first responders need them as well. So I just wanted to bring those two parts in.
I think that's really important, Lisa. Something I got even from that last part of what you said is like how much it creeps up on us. And we know with all of our first responder colleagues, and I'm just going to name an uncomfortable situation in the country right now for our law enforcement and public safety professionals. Trauma creeps up on you. You may not realize if you're going back to work every morning at 7 a.m. that you're going back activated. You're going back never having that reset Lisa just described, right? So there's a lot of stress. A lot of first responder suicides occur right after retirement. It's like the first time you have a day off, where disaster responders, at least, we all know you might work an incident for a month or 2 months or whatever your period is until you're demobilized. But for people who are continuously dealing with crisis, you don't demobilize until retirement quite frequently. And so there's a great demand in the world for us to be able to make these kind of resources accessible to the public. So I really want to assure you guys, everybody who's on the line, that the Crisis Stabilization and Safety Program, that everybody who's on this line right now, as well as quite a few others, are actively been participating to develop the tools and the resources, the exercises, and the structure. Will be trying to teach people exactly these kind of things. Like, I don't want to trivialize it to just tools, tips, and techniques and a cool exercise, but really, when you put the right exercises in play in the right sequence, it can make a really profound difference just in the moment. I found, Lisa, after the Bahamas, we slept, there were no buildings there. So we slept in a hammock on a fence line, and in the breeze, we could smell the carcasses that we realized a few days away were about 100 yards from where we were sleeping. And I remember walking across this field saying, why isn't this bothering me? Like, when did I just become so odd that I'm like, oh, it's just me walking across a field of carcasses, no big deal. But I did get home, and I noticed that there was a time cycle until that moment of reverberation came up. And it very much was that. There was like a shake in my belly and like a sort of sense in the back of my spine. And I remember doing a really intensive stretching session. And as I was stretching, the tears started to come, and then like this angst and this upset and this anger at the government and this frustration with people. And I realized whether any of that was valid, true, or not, it actually was just all the stuff that had been needing to kind of have a little bubble up space. And my body was the vehicle by which, like, being able to be with it was helpful. I didn't necessarily need to start calling everybody and say, let me just talk about this. Although, by the way, I keep all these people on my speed dial for exactly that and have gotten calls. But there's a moment where it's like, hey man, just some time with my body, like really attention on the body can be a really powerful crisis response tool, right? And it might be the most impossible thing to do. So.
And I think this is part of it. It's all of us saying we've worked in disaster before, and we are not impervious to the impacts. It's the first thing I said when I was reflecting. I was writing an article. It's like, one of the first things I realized is that everyone there is affected, including me. And that was the hardest thing to realize the first time around. And part of it's cultural, I think. It's us being able to be vulnerable, and us as in any capacity, if you're a leader of an organization, having the vulnerability, if you can, to say, I need to stop for this period of time, and I need help in some way. And people, I think that's what will start to shift our culture if we can have conversation around it, and if we can have leaders showing this is how we're doing this, and that we recognize that we're impacted. So we expect that you might be too, or that you probably will be if you're a part of an organization that we're leading. And it's hard. I think I totally align with and I learn a lot from Lisa when she talks. I align a lot with what Lisa says. I think it's entirely ego based pretty much. And it's such a strong part of human beings and American culture, that ego piece. And I think one of the main things that I pulled my personal, how I can change it, or how I've changed it in myself, and I'm not perfect at it by any means. I still have some of those pieces that I will continue to work out every time, is just also being a provider and having those days before I even started working in disaster, even going through school, working with patients, where I was like, wow, this really impacted me. And realizing, okay, this is not my disaster. Even if it's an individual, I am there to be with them and to offer what I have available, but it's not mine. I think that piece, in combination with just the humility, that continual recognition, I am human, I am impacted, and it's hard. And so in our organization, we also set policies up, because healers all come together and they're like, they just want to help. And so we have stopping points of, you've worked 3 days in a row, we're going to ask you to take a break. You can do whatever you want with that. We're here to help you if you want anything from us, but we're going to mandate that you take a break from disaster response for this 24 hours.
So I agree, like 99, maybe more % of all it is the ego. But I want to push back a little bit, and I'd love to hear your responses, especially when you're let's say the founder of an organization, or just being in a disaster. Disasters are by their nature overwhelming. If it isn't overwhelming, we call it an inconvenience, or maybe an emergency, but not a disaster. And so, like, the fact that things break and it's overwhelming, there's too much to do, just indicates that it's a disaster. When you are, let's say, the founder of a small organization, and you have a lot, like, I'll give you an example. The other day, I went to my database and I updated a date in my database because I'm neurotic and I like to have my data updated. Well, unbeknownst to me, that little date triggered something that I didn't realize would happen, and 174 families got a call back that just because. And that for me was a really traumatic experience, because here I was, like, something that I had done on a whim had affected 174 families. Now, I know about it, but the point is, like, I've been in many situations where people have told me, mostly my government brethren and sisters, some version of, you need to take a day off and let your team take over. And talk about triggering, right? Like, I just want to punch them in the face, because you think I have a team? You think I have a team? I don't have a team. And I have these hundreds or thousands of people relying on me. And yes, Lisa, you are right. Nothing I do or have ever done is going to cost a life. You're right. But it hurts. And so much of my decision making is a pain-driven decision. Do I accept the pain, the temporary pain of continuing, which is painful, and I know that I'm hurting myself, right? I know that. I've been trained, right? We all know these things. Or do I internalize the pain of knowing that I have 10,000 volunteers now who cannot help 4,000 people in the field right now, right? And that's just my version of it, but I think we all have versions of that, right? It's a pain-driven discussion, and maybe that is ego, but man, does it hurt.
Well, Aaron, I think I said, if you have a team, if you have a good team, you can turn to them. And I think I'm all about team. I mean, I'm very independent.
And to be clear, I wasn't talking about, I wasn't addressing you.
No, but I do want to say that I think team is so important for that. As a firefighter, if there's not an EMT with me, I'm not going to take out the ambulance, because I'm not an EMT. I can drive it, but what's the point of having an ambulance on the scene if there's no EMT or paramedic to do what they can do? And so I'm a huge proponent of teams. And that's I feel like that's a whole side conversation for us. Like, can I help you develop your team? I'd be happy to do that. But, having that team, I think, is part of our survival. And two, again, I know we're running out of time, so we can't get into this. But yeah, pain is a big part of it. And that's why disaster response is not for everyone. And it's way deeper, way bigger than that. But in recognition that we're already over time, I'm going to stop.
I'm sitting over here dying, like, I do not want to interrupt this amazing discussion. You guys, yeah, exactly. So how about that for a cliffhanger? Disaster relief is not for everyone, but if you're feeling challenged, tickled, quelled, inspired, or you want to write your legislature and tell them mental health is a significant thing in disaster, or if you want to join any of these teams and explore if it's for you, or if you want to take crisis stabilization and safety program, or just go to traumahealing.org/scope and see other people explain one resource and get involved as we kind of test that program out, you're welcome to. You're also super welcome to say, I'm so into disaster relief and I want to support this programming by sending a donation right now for $2. There, how's that for sounding cheesy? $2 to the somatic experience.
I'm on a PBS special again. Like,
right? Just to let us know,
bringing me back.
I can tell you that our executive director, all of our staff, all the programming that went in to be able to put this too brief event together gets a big signal. If we see one person donated $20 and 5 people donated 50 and one person donated $1 million and then 400 other people donated $1, it lets us know at least this was important. So
and is there a link to donate?
Yeah, the link is in the chat over and over, and traumahealing.org/donate is it, or you can text 26989 the phrase So support SE with no space in between, support SE to let us know you like these kind of events. The other thing is I asked Danny to go ahead and put this in the Q&A, but I already have an answer to this. The question was, do we need to come back and do more of this? And do we probably need to do it with just a couple of us at a time, maybe facilitate a discussion between two at a time? Because you guys get it. This is our introductory. Here we go. This is the introduction to the disaster series, because now I'm quite clear we need to do one on crisis stabilization, and this series is moving us there, isn't it? So I could see just having two of you guys back at a time. You know, I have a bunch to chime in, but I think I shouldn't be a panelist. Let's just get you guys paneling and chatting. So stay tuned. We're going to be doing these monthly again. We're going back to monthly, and we will send a follow-up email to you with the links for this one, as well as on Facebook. You'll be able to see it, and we will keep a video of it posted live on our Somatic Experiencing YouTube channel. What else can we answer? What am I leaving out in wrap up? I guess I really, one thing I'm leaving out is just this extraordinary depth of gratitude I have for each one of you. I know it's sort of like sitting on a nest with like eggs waiting to hatch, because I know each person here has so much to contribute to this field, and to all of our attendees really learning about it together. I think we each want to educate the world so that we all feel empowered, inspired, motivated, moved, and healed around our own efforts to support resilience and capacity building in catastrophically affected incidents. Does anybody want to close us out with a sending word? There's pressure on the spot for your activated nervous systems. No pressure.
I'll just say community is the biggest piece, and community and collaboration are the biggest gifts of this work to me. And so thanks for being a part of this community with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody. We'll sign off and stay tuned. However you found out about us, you'll find out about the next one, and we'll get better and better at promoting it to you. Thanks, everybody, and have a safe and stable day wherever you are.
Thank you so much.